Hi, welcome to Prefab Dummy. I am one of the co-creators that created Prefab Dummy, and I am going to give a little video about what Prefab Dummy is, why we made it, what problems it solves, and how I think it'll help you develop your game. I wanted to give a little nod to Low Poly Toon Village. We're using some of their assets by Hunnit Eye, and these are some great assets. We're just going to use them for our example scene. They're real cheap. You should definitely check them out. So real quick, we're just going to go over our scene and what's going on here. We've got our ground plane, which is just a big plane. I'm actually going to move that to the bottom just so it's out of the way. We've got our main camera, directional light, and the prefab logo, which you saw when we started the video. So pretty simple scene, nothing real crazy going on. We've also got a barrel game object, house A, house B, house C game objects. One thing I want to talk about right away is the reason these all say game object is if you're new to developing an indie developer in Unity, if you're old school, you probably know this, and you may have different workarounds, but typically we have found in our development cycle that the best way to work with game objects in Unity is to actually create an empty game object. Be sure that it's at 0, 0, 0, scale of 1, 1, 1, and then put your things in there. So a barrel at 0, 0, 0, and then move that into the game object. Now you have a game object that has a mesh that is the barrel, and as you can see, we have a particle effect that is also part of this game object for the smoke. The reason you do this, you can add lots of other things. You can have several different particle effects for an explosion or bullet ricochets. You can put in the sound if you need to. You can attach different colliders, different kinds of colliders. So it's just a good way to work in Unity. It is not required for this method for using Prefab Dummy. It's just a little advice I'm giving out to you, and how I've set up my scene, because that's how I've always done things. So you can see we've got the house A mesh and the little letter back here, house A, and these are all the same. And so what we've got our game, our barrel game object, and like I said, it's got a little particle smoke effect to it. And in a typical scenario, what you would have to do is put this right outside your house, right? Pretty standard kind of thing. I really want that to go away there. So one of the things we haven't done yet, and I guess I should go over the folders down here real quick. When you install Prefab Dummy, you'll have a Prefab Dummy folder. You'll have an editor folder that is also part of Prefab Dummy. You'll have some README help files in here about Prefab Dummy and how to use it. Fantasy Village is for our Fantasy Village, and then some example scenes, not example scenes, excuse me, example models, which is a barrel and a crate, and the texture to go with that. So, and that does come as part of the Prefab Dummy package, just because I always like, when I get something before I fully implement it into my game, I kind of like to test it out, and it's nice to just have something there that you can go ahead and test with, instead of having to bring in like spheres and boxes and stuff like that. But what we don't have is a prefabs folder. Obviously, again, if you're a developer or new to developing, prefabs are the biggest deal in Unity, and I'm just going to go ahead and make us a prefab folder because we don't have one. And you'll notice I put an underscore because I want the prefab folder to go to the very top of the list It is the most important thing, in my opinion, in the world building Unity game setup. So we're going to create a prefab folder, and I'm going to go ahead and drag our barrel game object in here to create a prefab of it, which we can see now by the blue square. In fact, I think I'll go ahead and make prefabs of all of these, and you can tell up here that they're becoming prefabs because they're turning from black to blue. So now that we've got that, I'm going to drag a new prefab out of here and put it at this house, and then I'm just going to do Control D to duplicate that and put one at this house. Now I know this one is barrel game object A, and I know this one is barrel game object B, and this one is barrel game object C. Now, so far, this is all pretty standard stuff. Nobody, everybody that's used Unity before is like, right, when are we getting to the good stuff? First, like I said, I wanted to kind of talk about the problem. So right now, if you play this scene, you will see that all of the barrels are black. So in our game, the barrels, when they get shot or take some damage, they're going to release this black smoke, right? And that's all well and good. And then if our game designer comes in and says, hey, we need to change the smoke, it doesn't look very good, the black is too harsh, why don't we change it to white? Okay, fine, easy enough. You can just go into the prefab and change the color to white, and they all change to white, right? This is all pretty standard Unity stuff. However, one of the problems you run into is that we want to use these houses like this in our game. Our game particularly is procedurally based, and we use prefabs like these houses with barrels and crates and roads and street lamps and yards and trees all built into one prefab. So for example, the barrel game object A would become a prefab underneath here, under house A, barrel game object B, and barrel game object C, thusly. So we now have this barrel as a game object with the house, and this is pretty standard fare for working in Unity, and that's fine. I haven't saved these prefabs down here yet, so you can see that, you can see that this doesn't have the, shouldn't push that, the house A does not have the barrel in here yet, so I need to apply this, and when I do, you'll see, right? So again, this is kind of tutorial stuff if you're new to Unity, and if you already know Unity, bear with me. I'm really getting there, I promise. You can also drag over or simply delete these old prefabs, and you can see it turns a red color, like, oh no, what have you done? And you can just make a new one, and now it goes back to being blue. So, and you can always just double check. You've got your house, the letter nameplate, and now the barrel is all part of this prefab. So the game designer comes along and says, hey, that white smoke doesn't look very good. Why'd you make it white? I didn't approve that. Blah blah blah. I was on vacation. Okay, fine. I'll just make it purple then. And it's still white. So what has happened is that this barrel prefab, his smoke is pink. But now all of our barrels are prefabs underneath these game objects. And for our intents and purposes now, we have to go and change each one. Now that is not a big deal in this scene, although I doubt I got those pinks right, but no, I didn't get them right. Pretty close though. That's not a big deal in this scene because there's only 3 houses, but like I said before, we're actual game developers, we're working on a game, and we have hundreds of these house pieces that are generated procedurally in our game, and we can't have this problem happen. You know, we need the barrels that are attached to the buildings as part of the prefabs to be changeable, because that's how game development is. You know, the designer comes in and says, hey, you know, this, I know you guys were just messing around, but I really like that hot pink color. Now you got to make them all hot pink. Well, that could take a very, very long time. Not to mention, also in our game, we have these assets in individual scenes. So you're talking about opening a scene, going into the game object, barrel game object, changing the color, saving the prefab, saving the scene, opening the next scene, etc., etc. So we came up with a way to use dummies, and now is where we're getting to the good part. So I'm going to, you see that we've got Prefab Dummy up here, and we've got this thing called Dummy Tools. Let me click on that, there you go. And Dummy Tools opens a window, and I'm going to put mine over here. Whoops, not there. Over here, okay. And I'm going to close the one that failed to load because I don't remember what that window was. So you can see when you've got the Prefab Dummy window, you can create a dummy. Okay, what does that do? Well, I'm just going to do it. So I clicked Create a Dummy, and right here at 0, 0, 0, 0 rotation, 0, 1 scale, it created a dummy. Now, right now the dummy is just an empty game object. In fact, I'll move the house out of the way so that we can see there's nothing there. It's just an empty game object sitting at 0, 0, 0. It's got the Prefab Dummy script applied to it already. All you have to do at this point is drag the barrel game object into this slot, and bam. Now, if you'll notice, this is offset, and that's a problem because when I made this prefab, I prefabbed it at its location, which is not 0, 0, 0, and I'm kind of glad I did that, and I'm kind of wish I had not, but it's good for you to see it, I guess, because this will show you one of the biggest problems that you will run into if you mess up. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because that is not what I want. That will get me into trouble later. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that, and I'm going to fix this by putting this barrel in the scene, putting it at 0, 0, 0, and applying that. So that should now be at 0, 0, 0, and everything's cool. So that is one of the things you need to be careful of. I guess it's a good thing I showed it in the video because now you know. So when you create a dummy, creates it at 0, 0, 0, and this offset stuff is all very important because when you get a scene filled with these things, with these dummy objects, you need to be sure they're, you know, spawning in the right place, and we'll get to that in a minute, but you can see spawn right here. So let me drag this back in there, and beautiful, now it's exactly like it's supposed to be. The dummy objects, you can see the color here. You can change the color. It defaults to this turquoisey kind of color, easy on the eyes kind of thing. And this uses, just so you know, this uses in on-screen gizmo, so this is not rendering the mesh, and that's a performance thing. So if you We could have written it to render the mesh, but it takes up a lot, and when you're spawning in the things, you don't really need it, so this is pretty helpful. So now what we can do is we can put our dummy in place of this barrel. And I can call this dummy barrel, what letter is this? B. Dummy barrel B. And we'll put him under the house B game object, and we will delete the original barrel that's in there. So now we've got a dummy barrel. And we can Control D, duplicate that. So you can duplicate the dummies. Because what's going to happen, I'm going to ruin the surprise, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you. What's going to happen is we're going to spawn in this original dummy. This original game object to where the dummies are located. So we'll put this one right here, and we will call him C. And we will put him in the appropriate house C game object folder, and we will delete this barrel. Now, you will notice when I was putting these down that I wasn't being very precise, because in this particular example, preciseness was not an issue. But let's say it is important, very important, to be precise, that the game object that was here needs to line up exactly with the dummy. Well, that's no problem. What we can do in that case is, this is house A, right? Yeah. So we can go into house A, go to our barrel game object, and create an empty game object, which puts it at the position of the barrel game object. We can now drag this out. We still have an empty game object, but it's at the location, and we'll go ahead and call it dummy barrel C. In this case, we've got an empty game object. We want to give it the Prefab Dummy script, so we just go into add component, and there's dummy right there because I've already pre-typed this, and it just attaches the simple Prefab Dummy script. So now we can drag this in there, and you'll see it matches like perfectly identical. It picks up the position, and it would pick up the rotation and the scale as well. So now we no longer need the, well, real quick while we're here, so we've got a barrel under here. Let's say we wanted to just be sure it's still there. We can hit the transparent button, and it makes all of the dummies in the scene transparent. If you want, you can go back and make them opaque just by hitting the buttons down here. You can hide the dummies, you can show the dummies. So we want to get rid of the barrel. I'm going to make it transparent just because I want to see that barrel vanish, because I'm weird like that. So yeah, alright. So let me go and save all of the house game objects, and I need to get this main camera out of the way. Directional light, and I'm going to move ground up here too, just to get all that stuff out of the way. Okay. So we've got, just to make sure I applied all these, we've got dummy, and dummy, and dummy. Excellent. Oh, wait a minute. I called this barrel C. Why didn't somebody stop me? You were probably screaming at your monitor going, "No, you idiot." Okay. Dummy barrel A. Let me just check my letters. Boy, that could have been disastrous. I could have gone mad. Alright, dummy barrel A, dummy barrel B, dummy barrel C. Okay, so now we've got dummies, and the dummies will spawn in our original barrel. And I can just do that by hitting this button, and it spawned in our barrels. And now I'm going to destroy them. Simple as that. So the game designer comes in and says, hey, guess what, guys? We've had a stroke of brilliance. The game is now going to be post-apocalyptic, and all of that pink smoke that was coming out of the barrels that I thought was so hot now needs to be toxic waste. Okay, well, that's fine. So now we just make it toxic waste green. Spawn in the new dummies. They're all toxic waste green. Duplicate the house C game object. It would be over here and it would be rotated. Same thing, doesn't matter. Destroy dummies, spawn dummies. Yeah. So, you can see pretty quickly the power of the dummies, right? Oh, I left the barrel game object in there, didn't I? Doggone it. Whoops, my fault. Yeah. Be careful when you're duplicating things. So that was another good example that messed up on me, but it's not a mess up, it's just how things are. So when you spawn these dummies in, when you spawn a dummy instance, you're actually spawning the actual thing. So if you click in here, it says barrel game object. So there's actually a barrel game object. So if you duplicate it now, it's going to duplicate the barrel game object. So if you just destroy that first, now you're back to just having the barrel C, the dummy barrel C. I'll do a B one this time. So duplicate this house, just the dummy, no object with it, spawn the dummy. Go change the smoke color again because every game uses toxic green, so our game needs to be toxic orange because it's unique, So there you go. And that's pretty much sums up the power of this prefab dummy. One of the things, like I said, the reason we came up with this was because we have lots of different little, we call them chunks of houses with decoratives that are destructible outside that we're constantly updating and changing. We're changing the particle values, we're changing the particle count, we're changing the particle color, we're changing the object. You say, what? Okay. So again, I was telling you beforehand that this is our original barrel game object. It's coming from right here, right? But they decided that barrels are so last week, so now they need to be crates. Okay. So I'm gonna call it crate and crate and crate. And this kind of goes back to having a game object with a mesh underneath it because it's just easier to do things like this. We'll apply that. And it didn't like that because it's got the prefab name. I wonder if I drag it over. Yeah, it's not going to rename that, but it is the same thing. Yeah, I guess I shouldn't try to do that, but oh, it already did it. Doggone it! I should have had those dummies destroyed. Spawn dummy. So you can see now it's spawning crates instead of barrels. Yeah. So this is going to go along and move with it. What we do in our game, and it's pretty simple to do, is this whole spawn dummy instance thing We have it spawn the dummies at world building, so we have a little smidgen of code that we use to build our procedural world, and it replaces all the dummies at that point. So we don't actually use the spawn dummy or destroy dummy except when we're testing and just kind of want to know, you know, what the scene looks like. So that's the problem that it takes care of. I think I went over all of the buttons. I did not go over destroy dummies. So you can see that, oops. Oh, see how these dummies, and this is my fault, see how these dummies are underground? Remember when I dragged and dropped? I should not have done that because it was not at 0, 0. This is what I was talking about before. You've got to be very careful about stuff being at 0, 0, because if you don't have it at 0, 0, you're going to get funky things happening. Back to 0, 0. Fantastic. Alright. It isn't changing that, but it is changing how the dummies are being drawn. There, now that fixed them. Okay, my fault, my fault. I warned you guys about it when I started the video, and then I did it myself. It's very late at night, please forgive me. But it does go to show you that it's very important to have these at the proper position when you make the prefab in the first place, and that's just a general rule of making prefabs all around. It also, if you ever see your dummies not lining up, that's going to be your issue. This brings up a good point. I just moved that dummy. So now what happens, right? It just moves the dummy. Right? Destroy dummy, spawn dummy. You can move this, you can rotate this. It does not matter. Let's say, okay, let's say we want to have a stack of boxes out here, because that's very typical of any game scenario. That's fine. So I think you can start to understand how powerful this tool really is, and honestly that's why we ended up putting it on the asset store for sale, because we kept using it. The more I used it, I was like, you know, this thing's really good. Like this, it's really good for a lot of things. Like, for example, let's just say that I deleted this original game object in the scene. There's no objects in the scene. You know, destroy them. Oh, there's no objects. What are we going to do? We'll put our game object in the scene. We will line it up at 0, 0 this time, because we remember how important that is every single time. You remember in the beginning I was talking about you'll shoot the boxes when they were barrels, and you know, it'll make them smoke. They don't have any colliders on them. When we set this up, we've got a mesh and we've got the smoke, but we don't have a collider. So let's just add a collider real quick, like box collider. It's perfect. So we will apply this to our prefab. So now our prefab has a box collider around it. We will spawn in dummies, and you'll see they all have colliders on them. If you are a mobile developer, you know that boxes are not efficient colliders. My mistake. I'm new at development. Should have used a circle collider, a sphere collider. Well, okay, fine. That's not a problem. Go back in here. Sphere collider. Oh, I didn't save that. My mistake. Didn't save it down to the prefab. Bam. So this is just a really good tool for populating prefabs from down here. We found it to be really useful for things like enemies. You know, we have an enemy that's called enemy small, and the enemy small has he's like this, but he's got about 15 of these game objects underneath him. Particle effects, sound effects, different meshes, different explosions, all that kind of stuff that a typical character has. Several colliders, different colliders, all that kind of thing. And we find it's really difficult to go into the scene and try to find each and every enemy small and fix all of his issues, even trying to select them up here. It was just easier to make the change down here one time and then just have it propagate to everything. So that's the power of Prefab Dummy. Questions, feel free to comment on the video. If you have any thoughts about how to make it better, things you might like to see. And we've been using this for a year, and we haven't we pretty much put everything that we thought it should do in here on its own. One thing I will say is you can, somebody might ask, can you, let me destroy these. Can you make prefabs of the dummies? Yeah, I guess that's kind of weird, but you can. You can have a whole folder if you want of dummies. It's not really necessary, but you could do it. So yeah, you can do that if you would like. The one last thing I guess I should talk about is the Destroy Dummies button. If you click it, you will get a warning. Once dummies are removed from the scene, you will no longer be able to respawn their dummy instances. So this is basically the end. This is the end game. You have finished making your levels. You have finished, in our case, we use a world builder tool. It builds the levels for us. We are absolutely sure that we are getting ready to ship the game. This level is done. All of the stamps of approval have been put on there. We are done. We do not need the dummies in the scene any longer. We can destroy the dummies. Now these objects are in the scene permanently. These are now permanent objects, and if we at this point had to go back and change their colors of their smoke, we would be in deep doo-doo once again. So just be sure that the Destroy Dummies, it is not undoable. It is, you're done. I actually am going to try Control Z. Okay, well, they came back. So it's not that doom and gloom, but if you destroy them and if you destroy them and then come back, actually I need to see if that did actually, yeah, so it even doing undo and bringing them back, it still left the objects there. So Destroy Dummies is pretty much, I mean, that's why there's a big red warning here, right? I mean, it is the last stage. You have to be sure that you're ready to get rid of the dummies, but obviously, we had to put that in there. And again, that's the kind of thing that we do in code at the build step. So when you go to build, it removes the dummies from the level before it builds. And that's sort of a higher end programming kind of thing. We're not going to talk about that in the video, just to kind of show you initially what it does. So yeah, it's been really valuable to us. I think it'll be really valuable to everybody that kind of works this way on a grander scale and is just gotten tired of the hassle of Unity's weird prefabbing issues. I mean, it's designed that way. I understand it. It makes total sense. But there are a couple of times where it's really bitten us hard, and there was nothing on the asset store that solved this problem. We tried many different things, and they were either really buggy, overly complicated, or really buggy. And I said that twice because we really had some real big issues with a couple of other solutions that were supposed to fix this, and nobody had any solutions. So that's that. Hope you enjoy. Thanks.